Hello, my name is Alexandra Peralta, and I am a senior lecturer at the Center for Wildlife and Resources at the University of Adelaide. In this project, I am leading activity 7. This activity is socially and spatially analyze the primary and secondary diffusion of information, intention, and practice, change through social relations following expanding connections, including household economic impact. So that's a mouthful, but basically what this activity does is the impact assessment of the interventions promoted by the project. So it focuses on the estimation of the social and economic impacts of the different expression approaches that the project is going to implement, and looking at also at the impacts of these approaches on women and men in farming households in northwestern Cambodia. The extension approaches that are being or that are going to be implemented are going to focus on the use of social relations or social networks as the main ways to diffuse information about agricultural technologies and agricultural practices. The impacts are going to be measuring different types of outcomes. So far, because this is an extension intervention, so knowledge about the practices or the technologies is quite important, and what kind of information is being shared and the knowledge that generates for individuals and also for their networks. How this knowledge that is acquired through social networks and social relations results in an intention to adopt technologies in long-term adoption or in this adoption of these different agricultural practices, and what are the social and economic benefits that adoption could bring if that's the outcome that takes place, and if not, adoption results in worse outcomes for those who don't adopt. So this is a initial conceptual framework for impact assessment, where I'm trying to put together what the project is doing. And so basically this is important because it allows to help this, or it helps design the impact assessment, and it also is something that is going to be developed further together with the rest of the project team. So basically farmers, in this case, smallholder farmers, are going to become aware and acquire knowledge about technologies through their social relations with others. And if the technologies are available, it's likely that they, will take up the technologies and experiment with them. And depending on whether the results of the take-up of these technologies is positive, or negative, or they get beneficial results, this can result in or lead to adoption. And in that process, they're going to be learning by doing and using the technologies, and also learning from others. So it's not just this learning from others about the technologies, but also as they implement these practices within their in their farms and in their plots. And so they will continue learning and mastering these technologies, and they're also going to share the information about their experiences with others. And it's expected that this is going to lead to improvements in their yields, in their incomes, or improvements in household welfare. It's also possible that they don't realize beneficial results from the take-up of the technologies, and they decide to disadopt and do something else. And of course, it doesn't happen in isolation. In order to adopt or to just experiment with the technologies, farmers need to have access to resources. This is also going to depend on the costs of the technologies for them, not only in terms of cash, but also the time that it will take them to learn and implement these practices in their fields. Different agricultural policies that are implemented, sometimes subsidy policies can affect what farmers do and how they do it, or taxes as well can increase the costs for them to try new things. Also, having well-functioning input and output markets, what are the input and output prices, and something that cuts across all of this process are inter-household dynamics, gender roles, and whether there are different gender benefits from implementing the practice. So this is kind of my backdrop, or what I would call a conceptual framework and a kind of theory of change. And this is something that, of course, needs to be further developed, but is kind of an anchor to continue developing the impact evaluation. So with that in mind, there's a set of research questions that are being asked within this activity. So first is, of course, which are the models and methods of extension that are most effective, and how they differ from different types of smallholder households. Is the expansion of social relations something that is going to lead to changes in awareness, in the intention to act, and in change in off-ramp practices, and among those who are related to each other and are experimenting with the different technologies. So it's both about the impact on those who are directly exposed to the project, but also those within their social networks and how they're affected by the project interventions in an indirect way. Is also something that is going to result in practices that don't eventuate. I mean, what kind of information is being shared? Are there some miscommunications taking place, and then practices get partially implemented, don't meet expectations, and are not adopted? And so, what are the social and economic impacts for participants in farming households, and what are those social and economic impacts for those who don't directly participate? So it's kind of, coming from that conceptual framework and asking these questions about what the impact of the projects are going to be, and what are the best or the most effective, instead of the best, the most effective practices for extension. That result from this comparison between different extension approaches. So there are other interesting research questions that can be answered here. Some of those relate to what are the characteristics of the networks of men and women? Are the links homophilous or heterophilous, as like people within the social network or an individual? Are they more like them, or are they different? Are they within social relations, they relate with other smallholder farmers that just like them, or they also have relationships with other actors that can help them having access to information, or that can prevent that access to information. And whether those links that they have that are helping with acquiring the right information, or there's going to be diffusion of wrong information that could be like accurate information about technologies, or just beliefs that are leading to not adopting technologies that are potentially beneficial. So this activity basically uses input from all the other project activities. So, for example, from activity 2, the village mapping, the household census, and the worships and farmer surveys are quite important input, because all of this is going to be done as part of as a baseline for the project as a whole. Activity 3, which is called field benchmarking, but in my view, is mostly taking plot level data and agricultural information, about includes production, post-harvest, inputs, and this is also going to be important. The livelihood analysis that is going to be conducted in activity 4 to better understand all the range of activities that farmers are undertaking, and that's going to help to see what are the trade-offs that they face when concentrating more in an activity or trying new practices, how time consuming they are, how they might affect them in other aspects of their economic and social life. The social information mapping is also really important, because the interventions are going to be done through those social relations, and so how is this going to be done? How extensive the mapping is going to be? Which members of the household are going to be included in this mapping? All of this really matters to see what are the benefits and how information is being transmitted around those social networks. And activity 6, which is all this co-design of the extension intervention. So this is very important because in order to be able to evaluate the impact of the project, we need to understand what is that the project is going to be doing and how it's going to be doing it, and how that is going to, what are the inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impacts that are going to come from that, and how those interventions are going to be implemented through social relations and through social networks. So the approach for impact assessment is basically thinking about the challenge of assessing the impact of a project. And basically what that means is, okay, how do we prove that the changes in the different outcomes of interest are a consequence of the project interventions and not of something else? This is very key. We want to know what is that the project did, how it impacted the lives of these farmers. And so for these, we're going to use panel data methods. So that's why the project is going to conduct all this data collection at the beginning. There's going to be also an additional survey once the interventions are more clear, where we can collect data about the specific interventions and the specific outcomes that are going to be evaluated. Using instrumental variables or other ways to basically use methods to control for selection bias or for anything that could also be causing those changes in those outcomes of interest for the project. It's important to have data on treatment and comparison households. So before and after, with and without, as a way to conduct a rigorous evaluation. Ideally, we would randomly select project participants, but it's going to depend on interventions design and, of course, the willingness of the partners to do something like this and what they think about, how this will go down in the field with farmers in the study area. Also, the approach is to combine the quantitative information with the qualitative information. Probably, as you have heard through all the presentations, there is a very rich and a whole, heap of data that is going to be collected. And so the quantitative information is going to provide a part of one side of the story, and the other part of the puzzle is going to be all the qualitative data that is going to help understand the process leading to change, understand the perceptions of farmers in the area, and get a better idea of why we're finding what we're finding at the end. So the impact evaluation survey, as I mentioned, well, this is going to depend on what are the interventions, what exactly is it the project is going to do, which is part of the process of collecting information, working together with farmers and co-design those interventions. So once that is clear, then seeing what are the outcomes that are going to be the focus of the evaluation is going to depend. So there's going to be some specific crops that are going to be focus of the evaluation. What are the practices that are going to be promoted? Because if we want to see what the farmers have learned about agricultural practices through the process, we're probably going to incorporate a shared knowledge test to do that. This is not, something new. It's commonly done and done in a way that is simple and understandable by farmers. The type of social relations that smallholder farmers have with other farmers, with traders, input sellers, all kind of other actors around them. And this, I think, is going to be very interesting because usually studies about adoption of agricultural technologies and the evaluation of interventions of adoption through, interventions that use social networks have focused on farmer-to-farmer relationships, but there might be other important relationships that are missing, that are contributing to adoption or to the disadoption of different practices that could be beneficial for farmers. What kind of mapping is conducted? So Andrew is working on and doing that, and we have planned discussing what is he going to be doing and how that can be linked to the evaluation, and what's going to be our final sample design and study sites. So because decision has been made that it's going to be more concentrated in a few villages rather than many villages due to COVID and other reasons. And so it's very important to, work together with the other activities and get that very clear and see how all of this is gonna be is gonna lend itself to statistical analysis. So there's going to be a whole lot of other information that is going to be included that is going to come from the other activities. So, and these are all very common, and it's important to include them because they also, allow us to understand better the households, to see differences between different kinds of households, and they all relate to, they also can affect adoption, the characteristics of the household members, the assets that the household has, access to market, to different services, land tenure, access to credit, information about, their plots, if they have had any, major impacts from COVID or any other shocks that the household has experienced. So all of these is going to be incorporated one way or another, hopefully for the evaluation. Village level information is also important, and it's also something that is being collected by activity 2. Information about infrastructure, services that are available, NGOs, other extension projects. It would be important to know what else is going on that can also be a confounding factor or that can affect knowledge and other outcomes that are of interest of the project. Major events that have taken place, major restrictions of COVID that might affect, what farmers are doing. And but it all again is going to depend on what are those interventions and how all of this is relevant to that. And information about other actors. So not only, so ideally for me and from my point of view, as I said, all of this is work in progress, is to get information not only from smallholder farmers and their perceptions and some kind of more in-depth information about the effect of interventions and different practices that they're implementing, but also in other actors that are not farmers. And I think that is going to come from the Oregon activities, and see how that can be incorporated as additional information for the evaluation. Another important part of this is capacity building, of course. Build the capacity of our partners in impact assessment. What is it? What is needed? There's a lot of people tend to confuse impact assessment with monitoring and evaluation. And so it's good to explain what that means and what are the differences between those two. Why is needed? Why do we need to evaluate the impact of projects? And data collection needs, and how to collect the data we need in the best ways possible. And something that is very key is, once things get more clear about what the interventions are, that is going to help narrow down what information is required, so we don't go out there and ask a bunch of questions and have a bunch of data that we're not going to need at the end, and leave out things that are important. So that's kind of the goal moving forward. And so basically, to ensure that the impact evaluation design captures of those project benefits. So the questions that remain in that the project team is working on is, what are the interventions that the project is going to be promoting? What are the agricultural technologies that are going to be promoted? Is there going to be a focus on a specific crops? What are the type of interventions that are going to expand social relations? What does that mean? What is the eligibility criteria of the participating in the project? Is there any eligibility criteria? Who are the other actors that are key in the area? And what level of interventions, the interventions are going to be promoted? Is there going to be interventions that are going to be done at the farm level, plot level, at the household level, at the village level? They're probably going to be a combination of things. So those are things that are going to be hopefully clarified over time as the project moves forward. And so for me, I think that's next steps that are important is to continue working a conceptual framework, just because it clarifies, where are we coming from, where we want to, go, what's the kind of the chain and the process, and then, what is that we're expecting to see, why are we expecting to see changes, and what kind of, information links to answering the questions that, that we have, and that kind of, background of that the theoretic of the conceptual framework is giving us. So basically, it's the way to link research questions, methods, and information needs. And that's kind of like what I see that are important next steps, as well as working together with the rest of the project team as they move forward with their activities. So thank you very much. That's it for me. Looking forward to seeing you on the 23rd, and happy to ask any questions.